And so I start today by speaking about the Holy Land, and our goal today is to talk about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about the phrases that'll help us while we're actually in Israel. So most of you know Shalom, and when we arrive, we're going to be arriving on a Saturday, so we'll greet people with Shabbat Shalom, which means have a great Sabbath. And then Shavua Tov, which is have a great week. So these are the messages and the greetings that we'll give people. This is the one when we arrive, Shabbat Shalom. But every single day you can say to people, if you see someone, you can greet them and greet your guide with Shalom. It's a very nice way of changing it up. They're used to hearing English all the time. Surprise them by speaking a little bit of their language. So Shalom is a very nice way to start the day. Three of the world's major monotheistic religions all come from this land where we're about to visit. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam were all born and linked to one another in this region. Christianity developed from within the Jewish tradition, and Islam developed from the Jewish and Christian traditions as well. Islam has a very deep understanding of the Abrahamic faith and religion because it comes from that. Judaism is the oldest surviving monotheistic religion. Can anyone tell me what the oldest surviving religion is? Hinduism. Hinduism is the longest lasting, the oldest religion known to mankind today, living religion. And actually Buddhism comes to us 500 years before Christianity. So the Buddha had already lived and died 500 years before Jesus came into being. Because Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all recognize Abraham as their first prophet, they're called the Abrahamic religion. So they all belong and are linked to one another. The word Jew and Judaism, the word Jew comes from Judaism. The original name from the Jews was the Hebrews, and it comes to us from the name Eber, which was one of Abraham's ancestors. So Hebrew comes to us from the word Eber, which comes to us from one of Abraham's ancestors. And they have some other explanations for how we came up with that name, but generally speaking, it's because of Abraham's ancestors that we have the word Hebrew today. Another name for the Jewish people is the children of Israel, or Israelites, which refers to the people who are descendants of Jacob, who is also called Israel. So the state Israel reflects that this is Jacob's land, Jacob's nation. The word Jew in Hebrew is Yehudi, is derived from the name Judah, which is the name of one of Jacob's 12 sons. So it all goes back to Abraham, but then the division between the 12 tribes comes to us from Jacob and his 12 sons. And I'll show you a little bit how the actual territory was broken up. So the word Judaism literally means Judaism, meaning the religion of the Yehudim. So here we see the breakdown of the 12 tribes of Israel. And for those of you who are familiar with Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, you'll be able to see here the song. I kind of play it through my head. You know, there's Zebulun, Issachar, Nasser, and Dan. So you can see all of these: Reuben, Gad, Simeon, Judah. And then you see a couple in the center here. You'll see Ephraim, Manasseh. You think, gosh, I don't remember those being two of Jacob's sons. And they're not. And you'll also notice here that Levi is missing from here. So the land of Levi isn't shown here at all because he didn't get territory. But then you'll see Manasseh. It's a huge territory in the center, and Ephraim. And Manasseh and Ephraim were Joseph's sons. So Joseph, being taken to Egypt and having his own territory and his own wealth, when Joseph died, Jacob remembered Joseph, and because he was his favorite son, he gave him the choicest lands in the center, and he gave those to his sons. So you see Manasseh and Ephraim were Joseph's sons, and those boys received the birthright gift of this land from Jacob. So the kingdoms split apart probably around 930 BC. We see here that this is from about the 11th century, and then in the 6th century, the tribes became two tribes. So we see now the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. In the late 8th and early 6th centuries, the Assyrian Empire and then the Babylonian Empire basically conquered these kingdoms. So oftentimes you'll hear about the time of Babylonian captivity. That's a phrase that you'll often hear when talking about this period. This is when the Babylonians came, and they basically threw out all of the Jews from this area. All of those 12 tribes, 10 of those tribes were thrown out, and only the tribes of Benjamin and Judah remained. So what happens now is this Assyrian and Babylonian captivity period, they throw out 10 of the 12 tribes. So they are basically uprooted from their land. They no longer have the territories that defined them and their people and their faith. And now it's just left to the kingdom of Judah, and Benjamin has a little bit of land inside of Judah, so they're allowed to stay as well. So when the Babylonian Empire was conquered by the Persians, the Persian ruler Cyrus the Great allowed the Jews to return to their homeland. And when captivity ended, all of the distinction between the tribes was lost. So we used to have all these different tribes with different faiths and beliefs. Not all of them believed the same thing. So this wasn't one group of homogenous people who said, hey, we all believe the same thing that Judah and his people believe. They had different beliefs. But when they were thrown out, they became disemboweled from their land, if you will. And so they no longer had their land to come back to. And so consequently, when they returned all with the same name of Judah. And so they lost their tribal identities, and when they all returned, they came back to the land of Israel. And because Judah was the one tribe remaining, they decided to name themselves after the tribe of Judah. Consequently, they became Jews. So everything that we know at this point now comes to us from the person of Judah, Judaism, and the term Jews. To celebrate their return, the Jews rebuilt the Temple of Solomon that had been destroyed by the Babylonians. So now we have the Second Temple period, which lasts from 539 BCE to 70 CE. So the Second Temple is not only indicative of a building, it's indicative of a new way of thinking. So you'll hear First Temple Judaism and Second Temple Judaism. That of what we know of Jesus comes to us from the time of the Second Temple. So Jesus would have visited this Second Temple when he came to Jerusalem. He would have worshipped at the temple here. And what you're going to see at the Wailing Wall, it's called the Western Wall. The Western Wall is the remaining wall from the Second Temple when it was destroyed again in 70 CE. So this is an important wall for Jews and for Christians because it symbolizes this second rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. It was during this time of Babylonian captivity that monotheism became much more clearly defined. According to Jewish beliefs, the Jews have a special covenant with their God. This covenant says that the Jews were the chosen people, and in exchange they would follow God's laws and worship only Him. This is going to be perhaps a surprise for many of you, but Judaism is a faith that evolved from polytheism. So when we look back, I want to walk you through this process of helping to understand how do we arrive at monotheism? How is it that we come to understand that these people worshiped only one God? So in the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy, it indicates that Yahweh was one of the children of the Most High God, El Elyon. So we have come to believe through Judeo-Christian understanding that Yahweh is the one God, correct? There is one God, his name is Yahweh, Jehovah, and this is the one and only God. Well, that's true in later thinking, but as this is an evolution of thought. So the song in Deuteronomy describes how the nations were originally formed, and that El Elyon, the Most High God, he's called God Most High, El Elyon had 70 sons, big family, tired wife. So he has a very big family, 70 sons, no daughters to mess things up. And what ends up happening is he has to do something for his sons, right? So he assigns 70 tribes. So each of his sons now are gods in and of themselves. So the Most High God implies that there are lesser gods. And so these lesser gods have their own duty and function. And each of the tribes now has their own God. Yahweh is now chosen as the God of Israel. So they are a young and up-and-coming nation. They're a warrior nation. They have to fight for their place. And so Yahweh is seen as the son of the Most High God, El Elyon, as a warrior God. And so this is where we start to see this understanding of polytheism, is that Yahweh is the patron deity and one of El Elyon's children. Evidence suggests that Yahweh did not begin as the only one true God of later Jewish monotheism, and he didn't begin as the creator of the world. He began as a tribal deity. And as the tribes started to fade away, as the tribes became conquered by other tribes, the winning tribe gets to push their God forward, right? So what happens to all of the other 69 gods? Those gods fade away into oblivion, and history will only tell the story of Yahweh, the God of the people of Israel, because that was the God chosen by the tribe of Israel, and that was the tribe that lasted. And as history tells us, it's his story. The person who gets to tell that story is the person who lives to tell it. And so consequently, the same thing happens in religion here, that their aspirations of being a larger tribe and of growing, they chose a warrior God by the name of Yahweh, and Yahweh then evolved into the God that we know and understand today. So as Israel aspired to greatness and sought to make a name for itself, Yahweh got bigger and bigger and became so grand until in their theologies there was no other God but Yahweh. And think how easy it is to forget generations. I would imagine that most of you couldn't tell me the name of your great-great-grandfather. Now imagine hundreds of years, and then several hundreds of years. What's forgotten in that period of time? If it's not written down, it becomes part of our ancient history. And we live really decade to decade remembering the stories of the people who told us those stories. And these stories were revealed to them in the way that they were important. So these old stories wouldn't have been shared, just the more recent stories about the superiority of their gods over other nations. So here we see the evolution from tribal deity to monotheism, and I want to show you the progression from polytheism to monotheism. So we started out, polytheism is the belief in many gods. How many of you remember the story of Moses when he went up the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments? And what was happening when he went up to get the 10 Commandments? What was happening down below? Yeah, he was gone so long. We don't know how long it been. We think about it in terms of how long could it take to walk up a mountain, right? Maybe a day or two, but it could have been weeks. It could have been months that he was up on that mountain. And so when Moses returned, he found his brother Aaron already discontent, and they'd taken all their gold and they had melted it, and they were worshiping the golden calf Baal. And so already in the first books of the Pentateuch and the Torah, we see that polytheism is still at play here. It's still rooted in polytheism, that these people who were to be God's chosen ones still weren't fully on board with this idea of one God. They wanted to believe and they wanted to be loyal, but they didn't know how to be. And so this comes over time. So we see this immersion here of kingship in the Jewish state. The state promoted now their warrior God Yahweh as the national God of Israel, and that this God was supreme. So we see now polytheism, and that Yahweh now is chosen as a supreme God. And so Yahweh and El, the God Most High, in their thinking all merged together at certain periods of time. And we see that there are areas of Shechem, Shiloh, and Jerusalem where these teachings started to merge together, and El Elyon became forgotten, and all that we learn about from this point forward now is Yahweh. Then we go from polytheism into henotheism. Henotheism is the worship of a single God while not denying the existence of other gods, right? So you can believe in your God and still believe in the existence of other gods. And they don't define whether or not these are equal gods, greater gods, or lesser gods. But in henotheism, really what you're doing is you're worshiping out of an allegiance. So you have your God and you can accept that other people have their gods as well. It's all very tolerant. At this stage, Yahweh is seen as a creator God. So now we see, and it enters the scene that Yahweh is seen as the creator of all things. So now El Elyon has moved from the scene as the creator, and Yahweh now becomes the creator God. the people of Israel still believe in other gods, but they are only going to be loyal to their God Yahweh, because it's their God Yahweh who has stood behind them and made them successful. So these ideas were accepted as orthodox until the 7th century, when prophets like Jeremiah began to say, hey, there's no other gods, there's only our God. But that was a recent development. So we come all the way from, say, the time of Moses, which would have been 1500 BC, to now 7th century BCE, with Jeremiah saying that there's only one God. And then we go into monolatry. So henotheism is not denying other gods, while monolatry is the belief in the existence of many lesser gods. So now we have one God, and any of these other gods, they're lesser gods. That's monolatry. And then it leads us into monotheism, of which there is only one God. This belief probably became solidified during the stage of Babylonian captivity. So when the Jews were pushed, the Israelites were pushed out of their territory, they were forced into other lands. And during this time, they came into contact with people who are Zoroastrianists. And the Zoroastrianism faith believes in a single supreme being. And it was during this time that the idea of monotheism, when they returned from this period of Babylonian captivity, they said, they thanked their God for bringing them back safely, and they said, truly, even these other people who were non-believers believed in one supreme being, and they didn't call him by name, but he has a name, and that name is Yahweh. And so now Yahweh becomes the single supreme being during this period of monotheism. And the monotheism that we know today comes to us from that period of Babylonian captivity. For those of you who are not Jews, you may be asking, who is a Jew? A Jew is any person whose mother was born a Jew, and in some parts of Judaism, their father. They also accept patrilineal heritage. But it's any person his mother was a Jew, or sometimes whose father was a Jew, or a person who's gone through the formal process of conversion to Judaism. Being a Jew has nothing to do with what you believe or what you do. It is very much a nationhood. So while there is a faith that is closely associated to this, Judaism in and of itself, being a Jew, is much more about lineage than it is about belief. You can be born to non-Jewish parents and you've not gone through the conversion, but you can believe everything and you still won't be considered a Jew. And yet you can be an atheist who believes in nothing about the faith of Judaism and still be considered a Jew if your lineage is Jewish. A person born to a Jewish mother who is an atheist and never practices religion is still a Jew, even in the eyes of the ultra-Orthodox. And it was even in Jesus' time that people would say, or in the Old Testament as well, that there would be talk of the strangers who dwell among us, or the righteous proselytes, or the righteous strangers. These are the people who followed the practices of Judaism, but were never considered Jew. They were welcome to practice, they were welcome to believe, but they would never be admitted or accepted as one of them. What Jews believe? Jews believe in one God and his prophets, with special respect for Moses as the prophet to whom God gave the law. Jewish law is embodied in the Torah, also known as the Pentateuch, and the Talmud, which is a commentary on the Torah. Judaism is more concerned with actions than dogma. So it's what you do, not what you believe, that's more important in the eyes of the Jewish faith. Jewish law includes 613 commandments. 613 commandments, not just the 10. They shortened that. The 10 is like the Judaism for dummies, right? We're just going to give you the basics here, but there's 613 mitzvot, which are the laws that regulate every part of a Jew's life. And they're very interesting how they come up with these numbers. There's 365 negative commandments. Thou shalt not do. And this is to abstain from certain acts. And this number 365 obviously corresponds to the number of days in the solar calendar year. The next part is 248 positive commandments. You shall do these things. You shall love your neighbor. And this corresponds to the number of bones in the human body. So the number 613 is the number that Jews associate with their mitzvot, the laws that govern their lives. Here are some sample commandments. to know there is a God, to not even think there are other gods beside him, to know that God is one, to love God, to fear God, to love other Jews. It's not a requirement that they love people who are not Jews, but you must love other Jews. Not to make human forms, even for decorative purposes. And if you're interested in learning more about the Mitzvot, I encourage you to go online, and there's some lists that walk you through the 613 Mitzvot. And it's very, very interesting to understand the ancient thinking and how these laws governed their lives, and how it governs still many of the Orthodox today. And there are 3 self-sacrifice laws in Judaism. The Torah asserts that the preservation of human life is paramount in almost every way, but there are 3 times when you should die or be killed before doing one of these. And that is, murder, some kinds of sexual misconduct, or idol worship. Any of those 3 things you may not do. It's better for you to die than to be engaged in murder, idol worship, or some forms of sexual misconduct. And so if you're put in a position to have to do one of these things, it's better to die than to do one of these. Judaism's view of Christianity and Islam. Jews do not believe in any of the prophets following their prophets. So any Jewish prophets, their ideas were accepted, but anything beyond that was not accepted, which was very interesting because they don't consider Jesus to be a prophet. Even though Jesus was a Jew, he did not speak in the way that they would accept as in line with Jewish thinking. He spoke in a way that was very different. And so he spoke not so much of following the laws, but of saying, look beyond the laws. Your laws tell you this, but now this is what I say to you, is look beyond these laws. So they don't ascribe to the idea that Jesus was the Messiah and the Son of God, nor do they believe in the teachings of Islam. Christianity, however, started as an offshoot of the Second Temple Judaism in the 1st century CE. So if you remember that the Second Temple was now destroyed in 70, Jesus was alive at the time of the Second Temple. So the First Temple had been destroyed, the Second Temple had been rebuilt after the period of Babylonian captivity, and this would have been the period in which Jesus comes into play. Christianity is founded on the life, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and those who follow his teachings are called Christians. Until the Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity in 324 CE, early Christian communities were often persecuted. People often ask, how is it that Christianity became so popular? How did it take the root from this small community of believers to becoming such a large community? And there's a couple of explanations for it, but one of them is rooted in Constantine himself. Constantine's mother was a Christian, and so he was born and raised as a Christian. But at the time, it wasn't accepted. So he wasn't really a believer in Christianity as well. Because he was a Roman ruler, he believed in the Roman pantheon of gods. However, before he walked into battle one time, he was going to a very important battle. I believe it was in 313 AD. Or 313 AD. And before he walked into this battle, he looked up into the sky and he saw a cross in the sun. And then the words came out of the sky and he read, Et hoc signo vincit, which means, with this sign you will conquer. And so he used the sign of the cross, the Chiro, to march into battle. He was victorious. And so a year later, he issued the Edict of Milan. And the Edict of Milan is what offered tolerance for religions all across the board. But very specifically, it offered now tolerance for Christianity. For Christians who had been persecuted beforehand, now Christianity was tolerated. And it wouldn't be long before that tolerance would go away, and Christians would now be the law of the land. So all of the other temples that were around the Roman kingdom, whether they were Mithraic temples or other types of temples, would be destroyed and replaced with Christian churches, Christian gathering places. And so it was really Constantine who took this little known, as they was called at the time, the cult of Jesus, took this little known cult of Jesus and spread it throughout the entire Roman Empire. And the rest, we say, is history. The Orthodox Church and its patriarchs split away from the Roman Catholic Church in 1054. So up until 1054, we have one church. And then an interesting thing happens. the Orthodox Church splits from the Roman Catholic Church. And that choice of words is an interesting choice of words, because orthodox means correct thinking. So they made a very clear statement here when they broke away from the Roman Church. They said, you can have the Roman way, we're going to take the right way. So it was really an insult when they called themselves the Orthodox Church, and it was meant to be so because they were intending to say, you have your Roman leader, we're going to follow the correct thinking way. So they separated at that point in time. And then you'll find later on that in the 16th century, Martin Luther, upset at the corruption of the church and the corruption of the Catholic papacy, began the Reformation movement that developed Protestantism. Christianity developed out of the monotheistic tradition of Judaism. Jesus was a member of the Jewish community in Roman Palestine. Jesus was not the first Christian. The people who followed Jesus were the first Christians. Jesus was born and died a Jew. And his message was for the Jews. And it was only in Paul later on that we hear the explanation that Jesus came to help the Jews understand the law. But if the Jews wouldn't listen to him, he opened it up to the Gentiles. And that's when we hear in Paul his letters talking about Jews or Gentiles, slave man or free, woman or man. We're all the same in the eyes of God. This is the first time we're hearing this message, because before that time, the message was only intended for Jews. So it's only now at the time of Paul that this message becomes wide-reaching for all people, not just the Jews. And that's a critical message that even Jesus didn't discuss. Paul really took it to the next level, opening this message of the oneness of all mankind under God. Christians believe that God is revealed through the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Jesus is considered the Son of God, born to the Virgin Mary to offer redemption for mankind's sins. After Jesus was crucified and executed by the Romans, he rose from the dead and ascended into heaven. Christians believe in an afterlife where those who have lived a good life will go to heaven, and those who have lived a bad life, an unrepentant life, will be punished in hell. Christianity has some interesting views on Judaism and Islam. Although Christianity developed out of Judaic text, Christians do not follow Jewish law. So that's why there's always a surprise when we talk about the 613 commandments among Christians, because they're only really familiar with the 10 commandments, not the 613. And so consequently, Christians do not follow Jewish law, although there are parts of Jewish law that we do follow as Christians. Instead, they believe that the law was fulfilled in the person of Jesus, who taught one simple rule: love thy neighbor as thyself. So here we have it, folks, 613 laws condensed into one. Christians do not accept Muhammad as a prophet. The church hierarchy in Rome and in Constantinople were very, very worried about Muhammad and the rise of Islam. They saw it as a great threat because they believed that Jesus was the Son of God and that his message was final. And then comes along Muhammad, who says, Jesus was a great man, a wonderful man, a prophet, but he was not the Son of God. And I have a message for you now that's going to summarize all of these things. And I'm going to give you this message that's going to replace the message that you've heard before in Judaism and Christianity. And so it was seen as a great threat. But Islam is a monotheistic religion that developed in the early 7th century in the desert community of Mecca in present-day Saudi Arabia. It developed from the Judeo-Christian tradition and the cultural values of the Bedouin community. And it was founded on the teachings of Muhammad as an expression of will, surrender to Allah. Islam expanded into areas controlled by the Byzantine Empire and the Sasanian Empire, and it was officially Zoroastrian and Persian-speaking. And here you can see the rise of Islam shortly after its start. Started in Saudi Arabia, and you can see it going over into Egypt, all the way into northern Africa, into Spain, and then all the way over into Afghanistan, to Armenia. So it traveled quite a distance in just a period of a couple hundred years. Many elements of Islamic society became integral parts of medieval and Renaissance culture, like the notion of chivalry, forms of music, the arabesque, and poetry. These were all great contributions from Islam. And now we'll talk about what Muslims believe. Muslims believe that Allah, the Arabic word for God, this isn't a different God. It's just a different name. So in the same way that the Jews called their God Jehovah or Yahweh, and we simply call him God, and the Muslims call God Allah. It's not a different God. It's the exact same God of Judaism and Christianity. It's just a different name for this God. But this God sent his revelation, the Quran, to the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century to proclaim it to mankind. From 610 to 632, the angel Gabriel revealed the Quran to Muhammad. And this is significant. Why is the angel Gabriel significant? Because the angel Gabriel is also found in the Christian scriptures, right? What did the angel Gabriel announce to Mary? That she would be pregnant and would give birth to Jesus, right? And so here we have again the angel Gabriel visiting. And there's a reason that this happens, because it signals something great and something true to these people. And here's the difference. We believe that Jesus, who was prophesied and told by angel Gabriel, Jesus was the gift. Jesus was the word. Jesus was the example. But here, Muhammad is not the Son of God. Muhammad is the prophet. But what Muhammad receives is the Quran. And so, today in our culture, when we hear that Muslims are upset and bothered and are willing to go to war over someone burning the Quran, this isn't the same as burning a book. This is the same for them as crucifying Jesus on the cross is for a Christian. It is that significant because the angel Gabriel gave them this book, the words. And so in the same way in the Gospel of John, where John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, they believe the same thing here, that the Word is God, that the Quran is the Word of God. It is God itself. And so when the angel Gabriel came, Muhammad could be killed. Muhammad was just the messenger. But the message that he delivered is what requires respect. And so it helps us understand a little bit about the position of the Quran in Islam. It helps us understand why they treasure the Quran, perhaps more than we would consider it offensive for the burning of the Bible. The Quran contains verses in Arabic that tell Muslims to worship one God and explains how they should treat others properly. Now, are there misunderstandings in the Quran? Are there contradictions? Yes, in the same way that in the Bible, there's often many things in the Hebrew scriptures that would, if we were to follow them today, that we could smite a city, that we could burn cities down, that we could kill non-believers. All of these things are true in all of these books. But here are the interesting things, the 5 principles and the 5 pillars of Islam. The first one is shahada, faith, orally declaring their faith. You must be willing to share your faith with anyone you meet. Salah, prayer. They pray 5 times a day. You'll often see them kneeling on their prayer rugs in the direction of Mecca. This is actually a practice that is not uniquely Muslim. The Jews actually began this practice of praying towards the Jerusalem from Zion, wherever they were located around the world. So they would point themselves in the direction of Jerusalem and pray. And Muslims follow the same practice, except they adapted it with the rug, and they get down on their knees, and they bow, and they pay homage, facing in the direction of Mecca. Saum, fasting. Fasting in the daylight hours during the month of Ramadan, during the 1 month. Very similar to what we would consider Lent. Zakah, almsgiving. They give a share of their income for charity. And it's a very significant portion of their income, and in other lectures, I talk about Islamic giving, but they're required to give a percentage of their income every single year, and it's not a small percentage. So Muslims give a large amount of their annual income to charity. And then you have the Hajj, the pilgrimage. Making a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in their lifetime, if they can afford it, is considered to be appropriate for all Muslims. And the word Muslim itself means one who submits to the will of Allah, one who submits to God. So all of these are seen as part of their role in submitting to the will of God. Muslims observe many dietary rules similar in origin to that of the Jews. They forbid certain foods like pork, they outlaw alcohol, and they show how animals should be prepared for slaughter. The Muslim calendar is lunar, just as our calendar is solar. And it's just as Christians count the year starting with the year of Jesus' birth, Muslims start their calendar beginning with 622 CE, which is the year that Muhammad moved from Mecca to Medina. And so every year, instead of it being CE, they mark their years AH or Anu Hejri. Major festivals of Islam include Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. These are the festivals of the breaking bread. Very interesting, breaking of the bread, very similar to Christians with the Eucharist. And the festival of the sacrifice, which commemorates Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Ishmael. Does that strike anyone as odd? Who did Abraham sacrifice in, or was willing to sacrifice in the Hebrew Scriptures? Isaac, right? And yet, the Muslims have a more accurate portrayal because Ishmael was the firstborn son. The Jews actually moved away from their tradition for a while, where they did not pass their honor, their blessing down to the firstborn son. It started going to the sons that they saw favor. But Muslims went back to that tradition, and they changed the story, or the story for them that they received was the idea that Abraham would have sacrificed his firstborn son, the one who would have been his legitimate heir, and that would have been Ishmael instead of Isaac. And so we have this difference here. Same story, but a different person who was willing to be sacrificed. Muslims believe in a day of judgment when the righteous souls will go to heaven and wrongdoers will go to hell. All sounds pretty similar so far, doesn't it? So Islam's view of Judaism and Christianity. You'd be surprised to know that Islam sees Judaism and Christianity as earlier versions of Islam. Revelations given within the same tradition, but misunderstood over time. So they will read the Christian scriptures, they will read the Hebrew scriptures, and they will accept that these were earlier versions of Islam, but that were simply misunderstood by its followers and practitioners. Muslims see Islam as the final, complete, and correct revelation in a monotheistic tradition of three faiths. The Islamic tradition recognizes many of the Jewish and Christian prophets, including Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. They're all accepted as part of Islamic tradition and heritage. Many non-Muslims mistakenly believe that Muhammad is the equivalent of Jesus in the Islamic tradition. And as we discussed, it's the Quran that stands in the same central position as the core of Islam, just like Jesus does in Christianity. Muhammad himself is not divine, but he's a messenger, a prophet chosen by God to deliver his message and to emulate his example of piety. Jews and Christians are specifically protected in the Quran as people of the book. And so consequently, any Muslim who does harm to a non-believer who is Christian or Jewish is considered to be not following the will of Allah. And so we see now where some of these misunderstandings come up, and we'll talk in a minute or two about the difference between Islam and Islamism. The Islamic tradition has long upheld the rights of Jews and Christians to maintain their beliefs and practices within the communities in Islamic rules. As a matter of fact, when you go to many communities from Saudi Arabia to Oman, you'll see differences. Saudi Arabia is a little bit more strict. A country like Oman will allow people to practice Christianity and Judaism altogether. As a matter of fact, in Oman, it's so interesting that we see the sects of Sunni Islam and Shiite Islam. In Oman, they all practice their different faiths in the exact same mosques. They share mosques together. Now imagine, just to show you an example of their tolerance, imagine Baptists and Catholics practicing in the same churches together. Can you imagine the ruckus? And yet somehow we think that these folks have got it backwards, and they understand in some of these cultures the importance of accepting and being tolerant of each other's faiths. It's a lesson that we can all learn from. Differing views of Christianity. Christianity and Islam have different scriptures. Christianity uses the Bible while Islam uses the Quran. Muslims believe that the gospel was also sent by God, and both texts offer the life and the works of Jesus. Belief in Jesus is a fundamental part of Islamic theology, Both religions believe in the virgin birth of Jesus through Mary, but their biblical and Islamic accounts differ. So how Jesus is born, the importance of these things differs. And there's less of a focus on Mary in the Quran. Christianity and Islam differ in their fundamental views in regards to the God they worship, the nature of their religion, the belief about the crucifixion and resurrection. Christians believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Most Christians are Trinitarian. We believe that there is one God, but it is a triune Godhead. So one God, but three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And it gets even more complicated. You think that that's difficult. Then Jesus now is seen as both divine and man. Equal, 100% divine, also 100% man, to help us understand Jesus' humanity and his divinity. So we have a number of different levels in which to understand Christianity. Some people do not believe in a triune Godhead. They believe in the single God, and that Jesus was the Son of God, but in a different capacity, that it was the Son of God in much the same way that Zeus would have come down to earth and had a son through a mortal woman. It would be considered, Jesus would be considered in that right, a demigod. But understanding the roles of demigods and their flawed nature, the first Christians could not allow that. And so consequently, Jesus became explained as both being divine and 100% human to help explain his humanity and his divinity and his sinlessness. Islam teaches that Jesus was one of the most important prophets of Christianity and one of the most important prophets of Allah, but they do not believe that Jesus was the Son of God, nor that Jesus is divine, nor do they believe in a triune Godhead. Jesus was a human prophet who, like all other prophets, tried to bring the children of God to understand the foundation of monotheism, to help them understand that there is only one God, and that was Jesus' role. And interestingly, Jesus was crucified, but at the moment of his crucifixion, just before he died, Jesus was miraculously saved and ascended into heaven. So Muslims believe that Jesus could not have been killed, that they can't understand how Christians can allow the powers of evil to kill Jesus, who is a God. In their understanding, it was impossible to consider that Jesus could have been killed at the hands of humans. And so consequently, they have Jesus being saved at the very last moment and ascending into heaven to save them from any idea that Jesus could have possibly been killed by humans. And it preserves their idea of God being all-powerful, that God can do all things. And they see the Christian perspective as a little bit limited. How is it that your God didn't save? He resurrected him later after being killed? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just save him before he dies? And Christians explain it that he needed to die in order to save us from our sins, that he came to die as a sacrifice, that Jews had all along and pagans before them had left their sacrifices for their gods as an appeasement, as an atonement for their sinfulness. And here it was, the Son of God himself came and said, I give myself up for you. I give myself for your sinfulness. I am the sacrifice that I lay at my Father's feet, willing to die for your sins. And that's something that is the fundamental, foundational difference between Christianity and Islam. Muslims contend that Jesus argued against division of God's oneness. They have a great problem with this idea of a triune Godhead. And Christians argue that the New Testament, particularly the Gospel of John, contains information that's centered on the Trinity. And there is some information, but it's largely a matter of how you read that scripture, whether or not you believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as the triune Godhead, or whether or not you believe them to be simply words that all refer to the exact same God. Islam versus Islamism. This is where most of us get caught up. Islam is the faith that Muslims profess. They submit themselves to the will of Allah. Islamism is the desire to impose the faith and laws of Islam over society. Islamism is the belief that Islam should rule all things in society. And I think most of us would generally agree that when we take one person's faith and religion and we want everyone to live by that faith and religion, regardless of what that faith or religion is, it's probably not the right thing to do. That we should all be free to worship and to pledge our faith to the gods in the ways that we choose. And so any desire, any attempt to impose one's faith over another is considered extreme. And so I would say to you that those who bomb, these terrorists who bomb in the name of Allah, are no more Islam, no more Muslim, no more followers of the will of Allah than a person who bombs an abortion clinic can claim to be Christian. And so when we put them all in the same category and we say, hey, you know what, those Muslims, they did it again, we have to recognize that really what we're doing is we're throwing the entire religion under the bus, driven by a couple of extremists, terrorists. And while this idea of extremism is growing and it's taking root in many cultures, what I can share with you is that an approach to battle this is an understanding. Because these people seek belonging, they seek acceptance, and they will never find peace if we never allow them to find peace. And so in our communities in the United States, we've seen a turnaround in our views towards Muslims and Islamic Americans in cultures all over the world. And I think the way to battle this is to open up our minds to understanding, to help understand that we all have a shared foundation and a shared root in the Abrahamic faiths. And now we'll talk a little bit about Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been occupied by different people of different faiths for thousands of years. And here we're going to walk through a little bit of the history. It was predominantly Jewish and Hebrew until the 3rd century. It was Christian from the 3rd century through the 6th century. And this is what surprises most folks. Most of Israel has been predominantly Muslim from the 7th century until the middle of the 20th century. So until 1948, when Israel became a state, it was largely a Muslim territory. And so this came as a great shock to many of the people in the Arabic countries and in these Muslim countries, that after World War II, we would create this state of Israel again. It didn't seem fair to them. And so it helps us understand a little bit the history that it was Jewish until the 3rd century, Christian from 3rd through the 6th century, and then from the 7th century, for almost 1,300 years, was predominantly Muslim. The significance of Jerusalem for Jews. For Jewish people, Jerusalem is not merely a holy place. It is the center of their faith. The city itself is holy. For at least 3,000 years, Jerusalem has become synonymous with hope and meaning in Jewish life. 43% of all Jews in the world today live in Israel. In biblical times, God spoke of the place that he chose for his people. So the return of the Jewish people to Zion, to Jerusalem, to Israel, remains a very important facet of Jewish life. According to the Bible, the first temple, the site known as the Temple Mount today, was built by King Solomon in 950 BCE. So 950 years before Jesus, the first temple was built. Mount Moriah is where Abraham almost sacrificed his son Isaac, or Ishmael, depending on your belief, and talked to God. Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians in 586 BCE. And the city's Jewish inhabitants were sent into exile, and the first temple was destroyed and then later rebuilt. Their sense of devastation was expressed in Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. Upon the willows, there we hung our harps. When our captors demanded of us songs, our tormentors asked of us mirth. Sing to us some songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I ever forget you, O Jerusalem, withered be my right hand. May my tongue cleave to my palate if I ever think not of you. If I ever not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. So they were cast out from their homes, and their tormentors said, sing us your songs. Think of it in the slave times when the slaves came to the United States and we said, sing us your spiritual, sing us your songs. And it just made them long for their homeland. This was the same feeling that the Jews felt when they were exiled. And so then when they returned, they were held captives by the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And then when they were returned to their homeland, they rebuilt their temple. So the second temple was built in 515 BCE and then was destroyed by the Romans after Jesus' death in 70 CE. The second Jewish revolt was put down at 132, 135, and many people think that Jesus was instrumental in this revolt, even though he had been dead for almost 100 years, that it was the message of Jesus and the spread of Christianity that really led to the Jewish uprising. So this 1,800-year period of exile began at this period of 132. This is when the Jews were no longer really in charge of their homeland. So we see Jerusalem now as historical Jerusalem, Jerusalem destroyed, a heavenly Jerusalem, this object of God's longing for his people to be back home. And so they remember Jerusalem today. All over the world, Jews still pray in the direction of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. They mourn the destruction of both the first and the second temples, and they recite the solemn promise, "If I ever forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand wither." Did you know that for those of you who have been to a Jewish wedding and you see the stomping of the glass, it's been misunderstood for many years by people outside of the faith. But this is a reminder that during all of the joy and the festivities of the destruction of the temple and the breaking of the glass. And likewise, in almost every Jewish home, when they build a new home, they leave a portion of it unfinished, generally in a closet, to remind them of the destruction of the temple. This is a practice that's not practiced by Jews all over the world, but it's practiced in many of the very observant Orthodox communities. And I have some friends in New York who, when they finished the renovation of their apartment, they left a small portion of their pantry or their closet unfinished as a reminder of the destruction of the temple. The significance of Jerusalem is also apparent in Jewish literature. The Hebrew Bible mentions Jerusalem some 700 times and mentions Zion some 150 times. And now we'll talk a little bit about the significance of Jerusalem for Christians. The early church recognized Jerusalem as the center of the Christian message. It's here that Christ will return to fulfill the word of God and that the last judgment will take place. So says Revelations. The significance of Jerusalem for Christians has two inseparable elements. The holy places associated with the life and teachings of Christ, his crucifixion, his burial, his ascension, and all of his teachings, and the community of Christians living in the city. So when we talk about Jerusalem, it's not just the place. It helps us remember where Jesus taught and what he said, and it also helps us remember the first people of the early church. Many Christians visit the holy places associated with the life and preaching of Jesus, and Jerusalem is a place where the Spirit is present and where the church was established, as it says in the Acts. Jerusalem is Christianity's holy land, associated with the most important events in Christianity. And yet, when you read the New Testament, you'll find that there's very little mention of Jerusalem. There's very little mention of where Jesus did his miracles and where he taught inside of Jerusalem. They make clear reference to it when you're outside of there. You'll talk about Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, Nazareth, Bethlehem, these places that are associated with Jesus. But while he's in Jerusalem, there's very little concern with the actual location of the appearances of Jesus in his life and after his death and when he rises again. In Christian tradition, Jerusalem is sacred in the life of Jesus' followers. Jesus was brought as a child to be presented at the temple. Jesus attended festivals. Jesus preached and healed in Jerusalem, especially in the temple courts. Jesus cleaned the temple, chasing various traders out of the sacred precincts. And Jesus' Last Supper in the upper room. And if you get a chance to go to visit this place, it's a wonderful spot. His arrest in Gethsemane, his trial, his crucifixion, and his burial, resurrection, and ascension all happened in Jerusalem. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is really the center, the focus for Christians to visit. This is said to be built over the place where Jesus was crucified and where the tomb was buried. Now, there's two different places. We have the Garden Tomb. You can visit that spot. This is often said to have been a spot which is over where Jesus was crucified, but you'll see that when you go inside the Holy Sepulchre, you'll be able to see the spot which they say is where Jesus' body was laid, and you'll be able to see it and perhaps even touch it when you go inside. It's a very long wait, so for those of you who have come for the first time, you really have to determine whether or not you want to spend the time to wait in those long lines to visit the Holy Sepulchre. But for those of you of faith, it is the center of our faith as Christians to visit this site. It's very similar to Muslims visiting the Mecca. This is really the most central site for Christians, is to be at the site of the Holy Sepulchre. The cenacle on Mount Zion is claimed to be the location of the Last Supper. It's actually was built by the Crusaders. The other churches that were built underneath it were destroyed over many centuries. So this comes to us from the time of the Crusades. But it is a beautiful, beautiful room, and it's said to have been built over the site of the original apartment of the Last Supper. The earliest Christians were outcast and used a symbol to recognize one another outside of Roman rule. Can anyone tell me what that symbol was? You guys are so smart. You wouldn't know it from looking at you, but you really are a clever group. Earthly and heavenly city. Jerusalem in the New Testament signifies not an earthly city, but a heavenly city. Christians see the fulfillment of the Lord's promise in Jesus Christ, who embodies the temple of God. It's not the temple that's the center, but Christ as the center of this place and of the spirit of Christianity. For Muslims, Jerusalem is also significant. And so here's where we have the problems, right? We have one very small piece of land that's considered significant by three groups of people. And all of them have significance and place significance in the same sites, which makes it very hotly contested. So in the year 610, Muhammad was believed to have been taken by the miraculous steed Buraq to visit Jerusalem, where he prayed and then ascended to heaven to receive the principles from Allah in one night. And he received all of these principles in one night, but it's also over the period of many years. And then he recited these principles for his disciples to write down. People say, well, he wrote these down. Well, he didn't write them down because Muhammad was illiterate. He was unable to write. He was unable to read. And so it was considered miraculous that he was given all of these revelations and he spoke them, and then people would write those down. And followers of Islam, you're considered to be particularly devout if you have memorized entire portions of the Quran. And so people passed this Quran down through oral tradition for many centuries as followers of Muhammad and the message of Islam. The Dome of the Rock is an Islamic sacred shrine built on the Temple Mount to commemorate the night that Muhammad ascended and prayed. This is very interesting. So for those who maybe haven't understood much about Islam, on the night that he ascended, Prophet Muhammad visited the tomb of the Prophet Abraham in Hebron to pay homage. He also visited the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem to prostrate himself twice to the person of Jesus, to the prophet Jesus. And this holiness, his veneration, his reverence for Jesus is seen in this act, that he wanted to do what was proper and he recognized Jesus' role. And so he went to prostrate himself before Jesus, before the place of his birth, before he went to take his place in his trip to ascend to heaven. And this was a sign of great respect. When you get to visit Jerusalem, it's home to many holy sites, including the Western Wall. I highly recommend for those of you who get a chance to go to the Wailing Wall and to spend some time there. It's a beautiful, touching site. Be prepared to be separated. Women have their own section of the wall, and men have their own section. If you get a chance, the men, you can go underneath the library areas along the side of the Western Wall as it continues. They have libraries and prayer areas. It's in a wonderful spot to go and to read and to learn and to see how people still pray today in the same ways that they've been praying for many years. What you'll see is what's called phylacteries. And a phylactery is a small box that contains the scriptures that they'll have in a leather sheath around their head. And they'll tie it around their head, and then others will have it on their arm. And it comes to us from the scripture that says, you should keep the word of God close. The word of God shall be on your mind and in your heart, right? And so because they can't put the literal word of God in your mind or in your heart, they put the phylacteries on their head to put it close to their mind and on their arms to put it close to their heart, so that the word of God is ever close to their mind and their hearts. And it's a wonderful message of keeping the scripture and the word of God present to them in a very meaningful and real way. So there are several quarters while you're in Jerusalem that you can visit. The Armenian quarter, you have the Jewish quarter, you have the Cardo. This is the Wailing Wall. This is actually a picture that I was fortunate enough. My father is almost 93, and my mother passed 10 years ago. So my dad and I, every year now for the past 10 years since my mother's passing, we travel for 1 full month together every single year. And we're very good roommates. We both have CPAPs, so we're like two Darth Vaders laying in bed together. Someone were to walk in, they'd think we'd be on respirators. But we're great roommates, and this is my father 2 years ago when we were fortunate enough to travel to the Holy Lands together. We've had a wonderful, we just traveled to the Amazon together, and so he was with me this past year, a year and a half ago in Jerusalem as well. And it's a wonderful moment for anyone of faith to be at the site, to be at the very temple where Jesus would have prayed himself. So this is the remnant of the wall from King Herod's renovation of the Second Temple and dates back to the time of Jesus in the 1st century. You can take beforehand, if you'd like to, I recommend, if you're people of faith, to write and take some time to think about your hopes and your prayers and your dreams and your aspirations for the people that you love, and to take that note and to put it in there. It seems like they're jam-packed, but there's plenty of room to fit your prayers and your hopes and aspirations. And to use this time, instead of writing it there, to come and to take time ahead of time to think about it and to deposit that in the crevices of the Wailing Wall. The prayer section of the wall is open to visitors at all times. Admission is free, but women are requested to wear some coverings over your sleeves. Men, you'll be asked to wear a head covering as well. They'll actually have a little area where you can pick up a free head covering. So you're in no problem. You don't have to bring one of your own, but if you have one, you're certainly welcome to bring it. Women should bring their own head and shoulder coverings, however. The Israel Museum, for those of you who have asked about the Dead Sea Scrolls, this is where you can find the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Israel Museum. You know, for most people, there just isn't enough time to visit this museum along with all of the other sites. But if you've been to Jerusalem before, I highly recommend that you go to the Shrine of the Book, which is where they have stored the earliest copies of the Bible, the Hebrew Scriptures, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Temple Mount is one of the holiest sites in Jerusalem for Jews and Muslims. Jews believe that this section of the old city, and you'll be able to see it when you're at Gethsemane across the way, you'll be able to look over and see the Temple Mount. But Jews believe that this is the resting place of the divine presence on earth and the source of the dust that God used to create Adam and Eve. Meanwhile, Muslims believe that Muhammad's ascent into heaven took place from this very spot. So again, it's a hotly contested spot, but it is now under control by the Muslims. So the golden topped dome of the rock is a structure above the rock where Muhammad prayed with Gabriel, with the Archangel Gabriel. It's also said to be the exact location of his ascension into heaven. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is another beautiful mosque. It's the third holiest place in Islam behind Mecca and Medina. It was constructed in 720 CE, so keep in mind that Muhammad had just recently passed. He would have died in the mid to late 600s. He was active in the 7th century. So in the 8th century here, this would have been constructed. And it's one of the most beautiful mosques in the world. The hours for visiting varied. You should have your legs and shoulders covered. The entrance costs about $10. You'll need to remove your shoes in accordance with Muslim tradition. There's no prayer allowed for Christians and Jews in this spot. It's forbidden. And so don't bring copies of the Bible with you along on this. Don't bring any prayer beads or rosary or anything along those lines. They won't allow you in if they can see that. Jews and Christians may visit, but only at limited times. Muslims are free to pray on the Temple Mount. However, Christians and Jews may only visit the site as tourists. All right, so you can't get down on your knees. You can't pray. You can't make any signs of reverence if you'd like to visit this site. Jews and Christians are forbidden from singing, praying, and making any kind of religious display. But non-Muslim visitors will not be allowed entry into the building of the Dome of the Rock. So you can visit the outer area, you can walk around, but as non-Muslims, you will not be allowed entry inside the dome. For more than 3,000 years, the Mount of Olives served as Jerusalem's primary burial ground. And this is right across, so you can actually see into the old city there. And for those of you who get a chance, I highly recommend walking through the valley as well. You'll see some of the older graves of Zechariah and Absalom. You have the Garden of Gethsemane. The Dome of the Ascension is here on the side too, and this contains the last footprint of Jesus before he ascended into heaven and marks the location of Jesus' prayers before his crucifixion. So this would have been the place where Jesus would have had his passion before he died. It's run now by the Franciscans. You'll see that the Franciscans run a number of the sites around Israel. The Mount of Olives is located in East Jerusalem, about 20 minutes walk west of the Old City. So for those of you who like to walk, it's really a great walk to come down from the Mount of Olives to go through the Old City, and you can spend your entire day inside the Old City just visiting the sites. There's so much to see. You will not want or be bored at any time. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is stand directly above Jesus' tomb, and it's one of the most holy sites. Emperor Constantine originally built the church in 326 as a place of worship. It's been destroyed twice by the Persians and then the Egyptians, and then rebuilt again by the Crusaders. And here is the inside of the Holy Sepulchre for those of you who won't get a chance to visit. Admission is free, but it does take a while to get through the line and inside. This is the garden tomb that's believed to have been where Jesus was buried and then resurrected. So you'll have one spot, which is where Jesus was laid. That's the Holy Sepulchre. This is another site that's believed that this is where Jesus was resurrected. So you can see that this is the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. This is open Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to noon and from 2 p.m. to 5:30. So make sure that when you arrive into Haifa, when you arrive into Jerusalem, that you're not visiting during the lunch hour because it will be closed. And there's nothing worse than having a very tight time frame and then arriving to the place you want to go and finding that it's closed. Alongside the Temple Mount is the Via Dolorosa. This is where Jesus walked on his way to his crucifixion. What I will say to you is that this is as powerful as you would like it to be. It is a place that has a lot of shops. And so if you're thinking of a place that's going to be hallowed ground, that's going to be very quiet and serene and austere, it is not that. There are vendors selling trinkets. There are people who are loud. There are shops selling pomegranate juice, which is delicious. Try some. But it's not a place for prayer. So if pilgrimage is an important part of this for you, I encourage you to bring some headphones with some music that puts you in the spirit of prayer, because it will not be conducive as you walk this path. Create that environment for yourself. It's just my little tip for you. It's a place that can be very noisy and it can put you off a little bit. So if you need that time, stand aside. Stand near the Stations of the Cross where Jesus fell, where Veronica wiped his face, where you find all these important places in the final moments of Jesus' life. And spend time thinking and praying at those places and try to separate yourself from the chaos that surrounds you. Yad Vashem, for those of you who have been to Jerusalem before and have been to many of the holy sites, I highly encourage you to visit Yad Vashem, which is the Museum of the Holocaust. This is a very moving and touching place that helps connect us with the horrors that have been placed upon the Jewish people. It brings it to life in real detail. It shows the shoes, it shows the luggage, and it shows a very detailed history of the lives of these people who lost their lives in the Holocaust. It's a 45-acre site, and it would take several hours to go through, so plan to take some time there. It can take the better part of an afternoon to enjoy and to learn from this museum. And my closing thought is that this is a remarkable city, and my hope for all of you is that no matter what your faith is, that you will find peace and inspiration and a willingness to be tolerant towards the faiths of all others in this beautiful, sacred, and holy city. And I wish you all a wonderful visit in Jerusalem and in Israel. Thank you all very much for coming today.